Yo, what's going on, guys? This is Migs here, back in another video. I know I've been gone for a while, but we're back. And today we're doing a small video, won't be too long. And it's exactly what the title is. It's going to be on building placement. It's not really, honestly, I would say it's actually a bigger deal than what people think it is. And maybe some people don't realize that it's affecting their games. Either Doom drop in the main, kind of hard to react. Zealots in the main with the War Prism. Siege tanks hitting your base from the low ground, all this kind of stuff, or units getting stuck. I think there's a lot of different ways like building placement affects us in the early game. And so for this video, we're going to be talking about where you want to put your buildings, how to develop consistency in putting down those buildings in the same spot, and then little tips and tricks where to put certain buildings or in which matchups it might be beneficial to have buildings in X area or Y area. So let's go ahead and get started. So I loaded a custom game, and I have an insta build plus I think the minerals give you extra, something like that. So I got a couple of minerals banked up here already, and we're going to jump straight into it. So I already have the wall set up here, and this is pretty normal, right? So I would say most matchups we're building this wall off here. Real quickly, before we get into, I guess, the other two matchups, we'll start with TVT. And the reason why we're going to start with TVT here is because at the pro level, you might see that people are not building their reactors here and leaving their barracks here. So if you watch pro level TVT, what you've probably been seeing are people getting siege tanks in the spot and then having their buildings hit up here. So having your buildings hit up here is extremely annoying, and oftentimes, if you're behind, it's kind of inevitable. Sometimes you're not even behind, and they siege up there, and you miss it, and at that point, it's too late. So what a lot of Terrans have been doing now is when they build this barracks, they're actually building it over here. So you'll see this first depot, this barracks like this, and then the add-on like this. And then every single building afterwards will kind of just come up like that. And this is all away from the cliff, so it can't be hit. So if we test it real quick, let's build a medevac so we can boost it over there. So this depot obviously is going to die. But this, for example, I can't hit anything. You guys see that? I can hit the depot, but I can't hit, units going down the ramp, maybe unless I'm here. And none of my buildings can get it over here. So if so that's something you're showing against in TVT. That's a cute little trick to prevent that from happening. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to a normal, in the other matchups. So in the other matchups, you're more likely than not going to have this wall off here. And this wall off aside, now this general building placement will be in all matchups. So here, you want to basically build your buildings kind of like vertically going down like this, right? And then you want to have kind of little gaps in between to make it easier to reinforce. So for example, that gap might be a little bit too small, so we could lower it, let's say. So now obviously this is okay here because we're talking about later in the game now. So, once you have this many barracks, you're probably looking at a 12, 15-minute game here. And so the reason why this is important is two things. Number one is that you want to have it so that your units can actually not get stuck, right? If I'm building my buildings like this, my stuff is going to get stuck in between this. See that? And that's not good. We do not want that. We don't want that at all. So we want to make sure that we're building down vertically with these rows and we're leaving space in between so nothing gets stuck like this. And this is something you want to be very consistent with because obviously you're playing a game and then you're wondering where my siege tanks or my marines are getting stuck or all this kind of stuff. And this is why it happens. Like our units are just getting stuck in between our buildings. There's a lot of very disorganized, and that's obviously extremely annoying. Now, the other tip here, or the other reason why you want to build your buildings like this and leave these gaps are for Doom drops, especially in TVT. In TVZ, you're probably not really worried about this, but in TVT and TVP, with the Warp Prism from Protoss, you want to be able to run into your protection defend as quickly as possible. So if I'm, for example, running from my natural to my main to defend a Doom drop like this, if all of my buildings are really choked up, like this, for example, if an enemy sieges tanks over here, I'm losing all of my units inside the choke points. I'd have to lift all my barracks. It's extremely annoying, and we don't really want that. But if you leave these gaps, then it becomes easier because I can run up here, I can run over here, I can run, even down here, and then I can stim in to defend, right? So obviously you're not always going to get doom drops, but when you do get doom dropped, it's something that will help you a lot, and your building placement won't be the reason why you get kind of screwed over when the doom drops do happen. So this is what I'm talking about with consistency is obviously not every game you're going to be impacted like this, but the one game that you don't do it is the one game something will happen where you're going to be like, damn it, I should have done it, or I need to do it. So this is extremely important, and I would honestly really encourage this. It's a really small detail, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, so with the main base aside, let's talk about upgrades and supply depots. So with engineering base, we tend to build them kind of like behind our mineral line. That can be really annoying when it comes to TVT marine drops or Mutalisk. I would say Mutalisks are probably not that common, but TVT marine drops. So for eBay placement, I generally try to build them kind of right here, kind of away from this area, maybe away from this airspace here and here. Obviously, they're still tucked away, but I kind of have them where it's a bit more of a commitment to come get to them. Same thing down here. Maybe instead of building my engineering base like here where they're readily accessible, it's better if I kind of tuck them back here. And you're probably going to see that a lot, is having them tucked like this. Somewhere where it's just very, very hard to get to, and they have to commit very hard to get. That's what you want. Okay, so for eBay placement, this is kind of what you're looking at, tucked away, but not directly behind your mineral line where they could get sniped, because a lot of people, Zealot run by, War Prism, Mutas, Marine Drop, they're going to tend to go for the back of the mineral line, and that gives them easy access. But you also don't want them to be in the way, or you don't want them to be like here where they're super exposed, right? Okay, so now with the engineering base out of the way, let's talk about depots. So with supply depots, obviously, you probably see a lot of people build them back here, and there's two reasons for that. Number one is if you do get dropped or Prism comes, the depots, if you leave them raised, the units cannot unload on top of the supply depots. If you lower these, units can be obviously roam on top of these supply depots, right? Because they're lowered, obviously. But if we raise them, then that can't happen. So by doing that, you're doing two things. Number one, you're preventing the Zealot warp in or the unit warp in from the Prism. If they siege the Prism like here, and all these depots are here, then they can only kind of warp in on whatever is open. Same thing in TVT. If you get dropped behind your mineral line, you're kind of having this little wall here where their units get choked up. And, obviously, yes, you're going to lose some supply depots. I would argue that losing supply depots is not as bad as losing your upgrades, especially if they're like, it's a big upgrade timing you're hitting or they're almost done. So that's why we want to build these depots back here in these other two matchups. The other reason is you want to make sure that, or not make sure, but a little tip is basically covering these little patches here, these little corners. So here, here, and here, these are all access points to your mineral line. So if you kind of cover them up, with that depot placement, you're kind of preventing those units from being able to run inside the mineral line right away, and they would have to, go around. Now, this is all assuming, of course, that the drop happens or the War Prism happens back here. Obviously, if it's here or here, then different rules there. But just a little small thing that helps a lot. And obviously, we need a place to build our depots. So at least when it comes to TVZ, this tends to be the safest place right now, especially because mutas are not really common in the matchup. Okay. So now this is something else that is mostly applicable for TVP and TVZ, and that's going to be the Walloffs. So TVP Walloffs can be decent. It just depends on whether or not they're kind of playing Blinkstalker heavy in the early game. So if you're kind of struggling with building depots, then this could be nice. You can fit a bunker in there and then kind of have this wall off like this, and that might help with the Blinkstalker, let's say. Obviously in TVZ, we're walling off anyway. But in TVP, this can also be nice if your opponent plays like really heavy on the Zealots, for example. You can kind of have a choke point right here in case you get overwhelmed or something like that. Same thing for the third. So let's say here we take our third, and let me do these freaking camera locations. Go ahead and do that. So if we take our third here, there you go. Okay. TVP and TVC, same thing. This is a good way to have an excuse to build depots, is to basically make wall-offs like this. And this, I like to make this wall-off. You could also do it up here. The reason why I don't do this one is because oftentimes the baneling run bys actually come through here. Um, and I feel like this is kind of like, how do I say it? Maybe a larger depot coming away from my actual mineral line, where maybe they just come in here and then come up here anyway. Whereas if I leave this here, this is definitely walled off, and they'll either have to detonate their banes here, or kind of run them this way. And then if they run them up here, oftentimes we position our bio here anyway, so then our bio can hit the banelings. But in general, if you're struggling with building depots, then you can just kind of pop these and make wall-offs like this. And then this will help you to remember. This will remind you to build depots so you don't get supply blocked, but also have some wall-offs there. And for this one and this one, I probably wouldn't do that in TVP, but this one next to the mineral line I think is okay if you're struggling with zealot run bys and whatnot. So you grab these. My army looks absolutely massive because I don't have any SCVs. So for the last, I guess the last big detail here, and you know, I understand that maybe some of these tips are more applicable in certain MMRs than others. So it's kind of like a general video, not really specific to any levels per se. The last thing is going to be missile turrets. This is actually a huge pet peeve of mine that I've noticed, and a lot of games and people that I coach are on Diamond or so. And that's kind of like building the turrets too far away from the cliff, like this. It's basically like a quick, lazy placement, and this honestly just like defeats the purpose entirely, right? Because you kind of want to stop them from even boosting in and unloading units to begin with. So when you're building that turret ring, I highly suggest building it against the cliff here and making sure that units are getting hit before they even reach your base, and that might prevent them entirely from dropping. Obviously, for some of you guys, I understand what you're going to say, Migs, that doesn't stop anyone from doom dropping my ass. And I get that, but this is still going to help you way more than building them back here where they don't really hit anything until the units are already unloading. Okay. So another tip here is, and this is related to the missile turret thing, but not 100%. If in the early game, you know, let's say a TVT, TVP, you're worried about Stargate unit, you know, an Oracle or a Medevac or a Liberator or Banshee, and you don't have an engineering bay to build those missile turrets, you can kind of build your Debos back here, and these give you vision farther up in the airspace right here, so that it gives you a bit more time to react. Somebody that does this a lot is Beyond, so if you just watch any Beyond game, you'll probably see him build his depots kind of like on the edge here to get that vision in the early game. So he's a really good example of someone that does a lot, and you can find him doing it in a bunch of games. Yeah, I think that's really it. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any. Well, my fucking lisp came out of there, out of nowhere. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything, but I think that's pretty much it. You know, bunker. You can throw a bunker in here if you want. Some people use depot spotters too. You could also do that. But the big thing to take away here is basically the placement of our main base building. So let me rewind here. So the building placement here, you know, making sure you're leaving space in between and creating rows going down vertically to really accommodate everything that you can. Obviously, if I did build these turrets here, I could even fit more barracks down here. And then upgrades, tucking them away, not, you know, right behind the mineral line per se or too close to the airspace, but somewhere that they just have to commit a bit more to get it. So at least if they maybe kill the upgrades, they're most likely to lose all their army or whatever they drop in doing so. So that would be good for you, right? It would help a lot to offset that damage from the delayed upgrades. And yeah, so very small video, guys, or I guess not really that small because I ended up rambling for 14 minutes. But if you like this kind of videos, it's a little small, like tips and tricks and mechanical stuff. I got a couple of them on the way, kind of trying to diversify the videos. So subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.